I still remember that morning as if it were stitched into the folds of my memory. The smell of rain-soaked earth, the sound of the school bus passing by, and that quiet, uneasy stillness that comes before a storm. My name's Margaret Lane, 62 years old, retired schoolteacher, though I still pick up a few substitute days at the local public school. Not because I need the money, but because it feels good to matter to someone, even for a few hours a day. That morning, I came home after a long, tiring day. The kids had been rowdy, the kind of restless you only see when the weather turns. My shoes were damp, my hair smelled of chalk dust, and all I wanted was to make myself a cup of tea and sit down in peace. But when I walked into the kitchen, something was off. The air felt different, stiff, like tension had a smell. Then I saw it. A shiny new lock gleaming on the pantry door. For a few seconds, I just stood there, staring. It wasn't there that morning. It couldn't have been. The pantry, my pantry, was the one corner of this house that still felt like mine. I'd built this home with my late husband, James. Every shelf, every tile, every memory had our fingerprints on it. I stepped closer, my fingers brushing the cold metal of the lock. My chest tightened. Before I could even call out, I heard footsteps, quick, annoyed ones, from down the hall. "Mom, what are you doing?" came Clara's voice, my daughter-in-law. Her tone carried that familiar edge, the kind that says more than the words themselves. I turned, trying to smile. "Just wondering why there's a lock on the pantry." She crossed her arms, standing there with that look that made me feel like I was intruding in my own home. "Oh, that," she said, her voice casual but sharp. "It's just, we've noticed you've been taking things without asking. I mean, it's not a big deal, but we all have our stuff, you know?" My throat went dry. Without asking? My own pantry? I wanted to tell her that the flour, the sugar, the tea, all of it, I'd bought long before she moved in. That this house had been mine for decades before her perfume ever touched its air. But instead, I said nothing. I just nodded, quietly. "Of course," I murmured, forcing a small smile, and I walked away. Inside, though, something cracked. It wasn't anger, not yet, just a deep, quiet ache. The kind that comes when someone you've loved like family looks at you and only sees inconvenience. That night, I couldn't sleep. The house was too quiet. Even the old grandfather clock seemed to tick louder than usual, like it was keeping time with my thoughts. I thought about my husband, how he used to fix everything with a laugh and a gentle hand. He would have hated this silence. He would have told me, "Maggie, don't let them take your peace." I pulled out the old photograph of him, the one where he's standing in the backyard, grinning, holding up the first tomatoes we grew together. "James," I whispered, "they've locked up our pantry." And just like that, tears I didn't know I was holding back started to fall. The next morning, I made breakfast early. The sun was just rising, spraying orange light across the table. Clara walked in, still half asleep, her hair tied up messily, phone in hand. "Morning," she said flatly. "Good morning," I replied, handed her a cup of coffee. She blinked, a little surprised, then took it. For a second, I thought maybe just maybe, things could go back to normal. But then she said, "Oh, and Mom, please don't try to open the pantry again, okay? We just want to keep things organized." Her words landed like stones. I just smiled faintly. "Of course, dear, I understand." But inside, I didn't. Not really. Because I'd spent a lifetime teaching children to share, to respect others, to be kind. And here I was, in my own kitchen, being told I couldn't touch my own shelves. That's when I knew something had changed forever. That evening, after everyone went to bed, I stood in front of the pantry again. The silver lock gleamed under the dim kitchen light, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel helpless. I felt steady. I wasn't angry, just calm. The kind of calm that comes before a quiet decision. I reached out, my hand hovering over the lock. Then I whispered, "Tomorrow morning, this lock will be gone." And I meant it. I stood in the hallway, my reflection barely visible in the mirror's dim light, watching her without really watching. Her face was lit only by the cold glow of her phone screen, her eyes darting rapidly as she typed one search after another. Natural pearl necklace price, vintage jewelry buyers near me, antique emerald earring. That night, I made a little show of routine. Tea at 10, lights out by 11, slippers neatly under the bed. But there were details I altered very deliberately. I left my bedroom door slightly ajar. I left the small brass key, the key to the velvet chest, hanging on its usual hook beside the mirror, glinting faintly under the lamp. And I left the lamp itself on, dim to that soft, golden glow that blurs edges, but reveals enough to tempt the eyes. Again I lay down and closed mine. But I didn't sleep. The silence of that house at night had become something I could read. Every creak, every sigh of the wooden floor had a meaning. Around 1:45 a.m., I heard the faint sound of the hallway floorboard, the one that always betrayed movement. Then, a shadow under the door. The doorknob turned, slowly, carefully. The door opened by inches, and a thin beam of white light slashed across the room. Her phone flashlight. I stayed still, my breathing shallow, slow, perfectly controlled. She thought I was asleep. She thought she was safe. Claire stepped inside, barefoot, her robe brushing the floor, the phone trembling slightly in her hand. Her face was pale, lips pressed together. She was terrified, yes, but not of me, of getting caught before the prize was hers. Her eyes landed on the mirror, on the key. She hesitated only for a second before reaching up, taking it gently from the hook. The small clink of metal was sharp in the silence, and I almost smiled beneath my fake slumber. She crossed to the chest, that velvet-lined burgundy heirloom that had belonged to my grandmother. She crouched, inserted the key, turned it carefully, and when the latch clicked open, I could see her entire body loosen with relief. The lid lifted. A faint scent of cedar escaped. Inside lay the jewels, pearls, brooch, ring, all shining faintly in the half-light. But what Claire didn't know was that the treasures she was gazing at were not what they seemed. 2 hours earlier, after my tea, I had taken out each piece, every heirloom, every memory, and replaced them with perfect imitations. Costume pearls, glass stones, and a fake diamond ring that would fool anyone who didn't know better. The real ones were already sealed in an envelope, delivered earlier that day to Patrick Nolan's office for safekeeping. Claire's hands hovered above the chest like she was handling sacred relics. She touched the pearl necklace first, letting it spill through her fingers like liquid light. Her lips parted, and I heard the faintest whisper, "They're mine soon. Mine." I didn't move. I didn't even blink. I wanted her to believe the illusion. After a few minutes, she carefully returned each piece, closed the lid, and replaced the key exactly where she'd found it. Then she crept out, soft as smoke, the phone light flicking off as the door closed behind her. The moment the latch clicked, I opened my eyes. My pulse was calm, my expression empty. I reached under my pillow and stopped the recording on my phone. I'd captured every second, her footsteps, her whisper, the sound of the lock. In the morning, she came down to the kitchen, dressed neatly, smiling too widely, her hair brushed, her tone syrup sleet. She busied herself making coffee, humming, a habit she only had when she was nervous. I noticed her glancing at me every few seconds, gauging, wondering. She thought she'd gotten away with something. She had no idea she'd already been caught. When she left for errands later that morning, I opened my phone and saved the audio file into a new folder. The name? Proof 3, Theft Attempt.mp3. The third in a series I hadn't even told Patrick about. Because I wasn't done yet. Not even close. That night, I wrote a single line in my new green notebook under Household Notes. The fox has entered the hen house, but the hen house is wired. And then, for the first time in weeks, I laughed, quietly, but with real joy. The next few days in that house felt strange, too quiet, like the silence after a thunderclap when the air still hums with leftover electricity. Claire floated through the rooms like a ghost, pretending to be human, smiling, chatting about nothing, cooking dinner she never used to cook. I could smell the guilt on her. It was thick, sugary, and desperate, like cheap perfume, trying to hide something rotten underneath. Every morning, I'd find her tidying places that didn't need tidying. The pantry shelves already spotless, the living room cushions perfectly aligned. She'd hum little tunes from the radio, too loudly, pretending she was fine. But I noticed her hands. They trembled when she reached for her coffee mug. That tremble told me everything. Ryan, poor boy, tried to play mediator. He thought if he smiled enough, made small talk, the tension would dissolve. He didn't realize he was standing between two women, quietly preparing for war. I'd ask him simple questions like, "How's work?" or "You been getting enough rest?" And he'd answer quickly, eyes darting, trying not to pick sides. He never understood that silence is also a choice. By Thursday night, I decided to push things a little further. I brewed chamomile tea. The same kind Arthur used to make me when we'd sit on the porch and talk about everything. Our son, our future, our fears. I carried the steaming cup into the living room where Claire sat scrolling on her phone. "Claire," I said gently, I've been thinking about what you offered, helping me take that jewelry to the bank. Her head snapped up. The reaction was instant, raw. Oh, yes, of course. We can do that tomorrow if you want. I smiled faintly. Tomorrow works. I'll need your help carrying the chest. It's heavy for me. Her eyes gleamed like a child's on Christmas morning. I turned away so she wouldn't see the satisfaction in mine. That night, I slept easily, not because I trusted her, but because I already knew what tomorrow would bring. Morning arrived sharp and golden. I woke before dawn, as always, when the world is still half asleep and the birds haven't decided whether to sing yet. I moved slowly, deliberately, setting my plan in motion. At 7:30, Claire came downstairs, dressed too nicely for a bank errand. Crisp blouse, hair curled, diamond studs that sparkled a little too hard under the kitchen light. She was nervous, excited, dangerous. I carried the velvet chest into the living room, hands steady despite my age. The fake jewels inside clinked softly, a lullaby for greed. Here it is, I said, setting it down on the table. We'll go after breakfast. She poured herself coffee, pretending not to care, but her eyes kept flicking toward the chest. You sure you don't want to wait for Ryan? He could come with us. Oh no, I said sweetly. He's working. You and I can handle this. At the bank, the air smelled like paper and sanitizer, that sterile scent that clings to money and secrets. We waited in line, Claire tapping her nails against the counter. I pretended to be frail, fumbling through my purse. The teller, a young woman with kind eyes, greeted me. Good morning, Mrs. Reynolds. How can I help you today? I smiled, handing her the envelope I'd prepared. Empty, except for a typed note that said, "This box is to remain sealed and under my name only. Do not open, under any circumstance, without my physical presence." I placed the imitation jewelry chest on the counter beside it. I'd like to deposit this in my safe box, please. The teller nodded, took the items, and disappeared behind the security door. I turned to Claire. There now, I said softly. Safe and sound. I'll sleep better knowing it's out of the house. Claire smiled, but her jaw tightened, her hands clasping together so hard her knuckles whitened. She wasn't smiling at all. She was recalculating. That evening, when we returned home, she went straight to her room without a word. I made tea and sat by the window, watching the rain start to fall in soft streaks across the glass. My reflection looked older than I remembered. Tired, yes, but sharper somehow, like a blade polished by sorrow. I took out my notebook and wrote, Stage 2 complete. The fox suspects nothing. Rain outside. Feels like cleansing. But the calm didn't last long. Around midnight, I heard hushed voices through the wall. Ryan's voice, low and troubled. Claire's, sharp and frantic. She took them, Ryan. You don't understand. They were worth something. We could have... Her words broke off into... I sat in bed, the light from the hallway slicing across the floor. And for a moment I felt that old ache again. The ache of loving someone who never quite saw what you carried. My son wasn't cruel, just blind. They thought I was weak, that I was fading. But the truth was, I'd never seen more clearly in my life. By the next morning, something had changed in the air. Claire didn't come down for breakfast. Ryan left early. The house felt hollow, too still. I walked into the living room and noticed the faintest shift. The chest was gone. I didn't gasp. I didn't panic. I just smiled and whispered to the empty room, "Showtime." By the time I reached the kitchen that morning, the kettle was cold, the air thick with that quiet tension that comes before someone tells a lie. The velvet chest had vanished from the living room table sometime in the night, but everything else, cushions, lamp, even the half-read magazine, sat exactly where I'd left them, as if someone had staged a photograph of calm. I opened the back door and let the cold air slap my face awake. Out by the fence, a squirrel darted across the grass, startled by nothing in particular. I envied it for a moment. Creatures that small never have to wonder who's stealing from them. When I came back inside, Ryan was standing by the coffee machine. He looked like he hadn't slept. "Morning, Mom," he mumbled. "Morning." His eyes didn't quite meet mine. "Claire up yet?" I asked. "Still sleeping, I think." I poured myself coffee, slow and quiet. "You see the chest on the table?" He froze, just enough to tell me he already knew. "What chest?" "The one I took to the bank yesterday. I left it right here." He blinked, pretending to think. "Maybe you put it in your room." "No," I said, meeting his gaze now. "I didn't." He turned away, pretending to check his phone. The silence that followed was so loud, it made the refrigerator hum sound like thunder. I waited until he left for work before climbing the stairs. The hallway smelled faintly of Claire's perfume, lavender and expensive guilt. Her door was closed, but I didn't bother knocking. The chest sat on her dresser, plain as day. She hadn't even tried to hide it. Next to it, her laptop screen glowed. On the search bar, antique jewelry, real gold or fake. How to tell? Can I sell inherited pearls without certificate? I almost laughed out loud. She hadn't stolen out of boldness. She'd stolen out of panic. I didn't touch the chest. Instead, I placed a folded note on top. "Return this to the bank by 3 p.m. today. I'll pretend nothing happened. Miss that deadline, and I'll pretend nothing ever existed between us but paperwork." Then I walked back downstairs, poured myself fresh coffee, and waited. At 2:47 p.m., the front door slammed. Claire stormed past me, coat half on, face pale. She didn't say a word. 10 minutes later, the car engine roared down the driveway. I checked my watch, smiled, and whispered, 2 minutes early. How punctual greed can be. When she came back an hour later, her eyes were red, her hair messy. She dropped her purse on the counter and said, "It's done." "I know," I said simply, and turned back to the window. The rain had started again. A thin drizzle sliding down the glass like time itself refusing to stop. I thought maybe this would be the end of it. Maybe fear would keep her quiet now. But people like Claire don't learn. They escalate. 3 days later, I caught her on the phone, whispering in the laundry room. Yeah, I'll get it. She's losing it, keeps forgetting things. You could make it official, right? Doctor's note or something?" A pause. "She's my mother-in-law, not my problem." That was the moment I realized this wasn't just about jewelry or money. This was about power, about who got to decide whether I still mattered. So I called Patrick. He answered on the second ring. "Mrs. Reynolds?" "It's time," I said. "Prepare." That night, I wrote again in my notebook, the same one I'd started the day Arthur died. When they think you're weak, they show their true strength. And when you stop pretending to be weak, they start to crumble. I placed the pen down, closed the book, and exhaled. Tomorrow, I'd stop being the quiet old woman in the corner. Tomorrow, I'd start being the storm they never saw coming. A morning sun crept through the curtains, like a secret I didn't want to hear. Everything felt too calm, too still. Like the air before a thunderstorm, when even the birds know to stay quiet. I sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug of lukewarm coffee. The world outside was golden and alive, but inside, it felt like something had already ended. Claire's voice floated faintly from upstairs, sharp and brittle as broken glass. She was talking to someone on the phone again. Low, urgent, but every few words slipped through. She's confused, acting strange. We might need to talk to someone official. I didn't need to hear the rest. I'd heard that tone before, back when Arthur's sister tried to get him to I stood, pushed my chair back, and walked to the pantry. The same one she'd locked from me not so long ago. I ran my fingers over the wood, remembering that night. How small that lock had made me feel. How powerless. But power's funny. It shifts quietly. It hides until the right moment. And my moment had come. By noon, Patrick arrived. He was my lawyer, but more than that, he was an old friend. The kind who knew my real mind, even when the world didn't. He wore that usual gray suit, slightly wrinkled, always smelling faintly of peppermint and old paper. "Morning, Mrs. Reynolds," he said as I opened the door. "You sure about this?" I smiled. I've never been more sure. He followed me into the living room, spreading documents across the coffee table. Neat stacks, legal seals, and signatures waiting for my hand. The light caught the gold pen he set beside them, the one Arthur had given him years ago when he helped us settle the farm's deed. Claire walked in halfway through. She froze when she saw him. "What's going on?" she asked, her tone dripping with suspicion. Patrick smiled politely. "Just some paperwork, ma'am. Mrs. Reynolds' estate management updates." Her face went pale. "Estate? What?" I turned to her calmly. "You were right, Claire. I have been forgetting things, but not the important ones." She crossed her arms. "You don't need to do all this now. You're fine." "Oh, I'm fine, all right," I said softly. "That's why I'm making sure everything's handled properly." Patrick cleared his throat. "To confirm, Mrs. Reynolds, you wish to transfer your living will and financial control to the trustee of your choice?" "Yes," I said, eyes still on Claire. "To my son, Ryan, but with one small addition." Patrick looked up, waiting. "In the event of Ryan's incapacity, all decisions revert directly to my chosen executor, not his spouse." Claire's mouth fell open. "What? You can't!" "Oh, but I can," I interrupted gently. "I built this house. I paid for that roof. I made the meals you eat. You forget this was my world long before it was yours." Patrick slid the papers toward me. I signed each one slowly, deliberately, the sound of the pen scratching like thunder rolling in from far away. After Patrick left, the house felt heavier, quieter. Claire paced the kitchen, her footsteps sharp and uneven. I stayed on the couch, watching her without speaking. Finally, she spun around. "Why are you doing this? I never meant to—" "To what?" I asked. "Lock me out? Sell what isn't yours? Pretend kindness while planning my funeral?" Her eyes glistened with tears, but they were the kind tears, the kind that appear when a person's caught, not when they're sorry. "You've misunderstood everything," she said. I leaned forward. "Sweetheart, I might be old, but I'm not blind. You saw a woman losing her grip. What you didn't see was the steel under my skin." She went quiet, and for a second, just 1 second, I almost pitied her. She wasn't evil, just small. So small, she thought taking what I had would make her bigger. "I'll talk to Ryan," she whispered finally. "Do that," I said, voice calm as water. "He should hear your side. I'll tell him mine too." That night, I wrote again in my notebook, candle flickering on the table beside me. They mistake silence for surrender. But silence is just the sound of planning. I closed the book, blew out the candle, and sat in the dark for a while. Somewhere upstairs, I heard Claire crying, soft at first, then louder, then a door slam. For the first time since Arthur died, I didn't feel small. I felt solid, grounded. Like the roots of an old tree that's seen too many storms to be afraid of the next one. I whispered into the dark, "Tomorrow, she'll show her true colors. And when she does, I'll be ready." The next morning came, dressed in sunlight that felt too bright, too honest. It crept through the curtains like a truth I wasn't ready to face yet. I woke to the smell of burnt toast. Claire never could cook when she was nervous. And the sound of her and Ryan talking in those half-whispers people use when they think the walls aren't listening. I didn't rush. I let them talk. I'd learned long ago that when people think you're not paying attention, they tell you exactly who they are. I sat on the edge of my bed, brushed my thinning silver hair, and listened. "She's out of control, Ryan," Claire was saying. "She's doing things behind our backs, talking to lawyers, moving money around. What if she's—" Ryan's voice cut in, soft, weary. "She's my mother, Claire. She's not crazy. Maybe she's just trying to protect what's hers." "What's hers?" Claire's voice cracked. "Everything in this house belongs to us now. We've been taking care of her." I could almost hear Ryan's sigh, that deep kind of sigh a man gives when he's caught between guilt and love. "Taking care of her isn't ownership," he said quietly. "Don't forget that." Then silence. Heavy, long, unspoken silence. I smiled to myself. Ryan still had some of his father in him after all. I waited until mid-morning before walking downstairs. Claire was sitting at the kitchen counter, face pale, phone clenched in her hand like a lifeline. Ryan sat across from her, eyes tired. When I entered, the air shifted, like a stage light had just swung to me. "Morning," I said cheerfully, opening the pantry. "Guess what? No luck." Ryan cleared his throat. "Mom, Claire told me you've been feeling unsafe, that you're worried someone might take advantage of you." I stirred my tea, slow and steady. "Unsafe? No, dear. Just careful. There's a difference." Claire set her phone down, her voice trembling just enough to sound rehearsed. "We're all family here. You don't have to treat us like strangers." I met her gaze, calm, steady, unflinching. "Family doesn't put locks on pantries, darling." The color drained from her face. Ryan looked between us, helpless. "Can we all just stop this? Please. We've been tensed for weeks. This isn't good for anyone." I nodded slowly. You're right, sweetheart, which is why I've made a decision. I'm moving out. The words hit the room like a thunderclap. Ryan blinked. What? Mom, you don't have to. Oh, I think I do, I said gently. I've lived in this house long enough to know when it no longer feels like home. Claire's mouth fell open. You can't just. Where will you even go? I smiled faintly. Somewhere peaceful. Somewhere I can hear myself think again. That afternoon, I packed. Not much. A few clothes, my photo albums, Arthur's old pocket watch, and my notebook. The rest, I left behind. Things lose their meaning when the air around them turns toxic. Ryan helped me load the car. Claire stayed inside, pretending to be busy, but I caught her watching from the window. Her expression wasn't guilt. It was confusion, like she couldn't understand how her little game had spun out of control. Before I left, I slipped an envelope under the sugar jar. Inside was a letter. Claire, I've been on this earth long enough to know that people show their hearts, not through their words, but through how they treat those who can't fight back. You saw me as weak, something to control. But you forgot. Age doesn't take away strength. It just hides it until it's needed. Don't worry. I'm not angry. You've given me the gift of clarity. Now I know what peace looks like. It looks like walking away. I hope someday you find your own kind of peace too. The kind that doesn't come from owning things, but from understanding people. Margaret Reynolds. As the car rolled out of the driveway, I didn't look back. I'd done enough looking back in my life. The wind outside carried that faint smell of wet grass and new beginnings. For the first time in years, I felt free. But freedom, I've learned, doesn't always mean the story's over. Sometimes it's just the calm before a new kind of storm. Because a week later, I got a letter in the mail. Official paper, stamped and sealed. Ryan's name at the top. Claire's handwriting in the margin. And the words that made my heart drop like a stone. Petition for power of attorney. Incompetence claim. ... I still remember that Sunday afternoon. The kind of still, heavy air that sits on your skin and makes every sound feel louder than it should. The cicadas hummed outside, the curtains hung motionless, and even the old clock on the wall seemed to tick slower, as if time itself was holding its breath. I was in my bedroom, sorting through the pieces of my life, boxes of old dresses, worn-out shoes, a few keepsakes that had outlived their purpose. Then, beneath it all, I found the chest. That velvet-lined chest had followed me through every chapter of my story, from my grandmother's attic to my mother's hands, and then to mine. It wasn't just jewelry inside that chest. It was history. It was love, loss, and legacy. As I lifted the lid, I could feel the soft air shift behind me, the kind of stillness that tells you someone's watching. I didn't have to turn around. I knew it was her, Clara. She stood at the door, pretending to be passing by, but her eyes were locked on that chest, like a child staring at candy through a shop window. "Oh," I said softly, feigning surprise. "I didn't see you there, dear." She stepped closer, her voice light, but her breath just a little too quick. "Those are beautiful. Are they real?" I smiled. They've been in the family for generations. Each one has its own story. I picked up the pearl necklace, creamy, uneven pearls strung together with the patience of time. Arthur had given it to me on our 20th anniversary. He'd saved for 2 years to buy it, never once complaining, never once telling me the cost. "They're stunning," she whispered, her fingers twitching slightly as she reached for them. I let her hold them, and I watched her face carefully. Her reflection in the pearls said everything she didn't. "Must be worth a fortune," she said. "Maybe," I answered softly, "but to me, it's worth more in memory than in money." Her gaze lingered, heavy and hungry. I could almost see the gears turning behind her eyes. "And where do you keep them?" she asked. I smiled, a slow, practiced smile. "Right here, in my closet. I've always kept them close." Then I hesitated, pretending to think aloud. "Although I have been considering a safe deposit box lately. Just in case." Clara nodded quickly, too quickly. "Yes, that's a great idea. I could help you with that if you'd like." My heart was calm. I had been a teacher long enough to recognize when someone was testing boundaries or trying to plan something behind your back. "Oh, that's very sweet of you," I said. "Maybe one of these days." I took the pearls gently from her hand and placed them back into the chest, one piece at a time. The emerald earrings, the onyx brooch, and finally, the ring Arthur had slipped onto my finger under the cherry blossoms all those years ago. When I locked the chest and hung the tiny key back around my neck, I could feel her eyes following every movement. "Well, I'll let you rest," she said, her voice tight. But her feet didn't move. She stood there, memorizing every detail. The chest, the lock, the chain around my neck. Only when I turned toward her did she finally step back. "Good night, Eleanor," she murmured. "Good night, dear." When she left, I waited 5 minutes before walking through the hallway. She was sitting on the sofa, her phone in her hands, pretending to scroll, but her screen reflected on the hallway mirror. And that's when I saw it. Searches. Natural pearl necklace value. Antique jewelry appraisal. Selling old family jewels discreetly. I smiled, a small, knowing smile. Sometimes silence is the best teacher, and that night, silence taught me everything I needed to know. For the next few days, everything in the house shifted, subtly but unmistakably. Clara's tone changed, her words softened, her steps were quieter, her smile sweeter. She began to move through my home like she belonged there, touching things she used to ignore, humming while she cooked, asking questions she never cared to ask before. "Would you like tea, Eleanor?" she'd say, her voice dripping with honey. Or, "You really shouldn't carry those groceries yourself. Let me help." If I hadn't known better, I might have believed she had turned over a new leaf. But the eyes always betray the truth. Hers never softened. Behind those polite smiles lived calculation, the kind that measures time and value, not affection. One Wednesday afternoon, while the sun was still hanging lazily over the garden, she came to my room with a tray of tea and biscuits. "Eleanor," she said sweetly, "have you thought about the bank?" I looked up from my embroidery, pretending to think. "The bank? Yes, you mentioned the safe deposit box. I can come with you tomorrow. We'll open it together." "Tomorrow?" I said, feigning surprise. "Oh, I'm not sure, dear. They might need a lot of paperwork." She smiled, the kind of smile you'd give a child who doesn't understand how the world works. "Don't you worry about that. I'll handle everything. I can even put my name on the box too, so if anything ever happens to you." She paused, as if to make it sound innocent. "We'll have access. You know, for Ryan." There it was, the real reason. I nodded slowly, pretending to consider it. "That's very thoughtful of you," I said softly. "Let me think about it." But I didn't think. That night, I locked myself in the bathroom, turned on the water to drown out the sound, and called Patrick Nolan, my lawyer. "She took the bait," I whispered. "Are you sure you want to go through with this, Miss Reynolds? It's risky." "I'm sure," I said. "I need her to show her true colors. Prepare the papers, the way we discussed." He sighed. "With the clause?" "Yes," I said firmly. "Exactly as we planned." 2 days later, Clara's face lit up like a Christmas tree when I told her I had made an appointment at the bank. "Perfect," she said too quickly. "I'll go with you." Friday came, bright and sharp. We went to the bank together. The vault smelled of metal and dust, like secrets long kept. We placed the velvet chest inside a polished steel box. The officer handed us the forms, explaining the terms quickly. Clara barely listened, nodding impatiently as she signed. What she didn't know was that hidden within those documents was a condition, one that Patrick and I had carefully crafted. The box could only be opened with 2 keys, mine and Patrick's. It could only be accessed if I died of natural causes, certified by 2 doctors. And if my death was in any way suspicious, the box would be sealed automatically and handed over to investigators. Clara thought she had won, but she had just stepped into the web I had spun. As we left the bank, she looped her arm through mine, all warmth and false affection. "It feels good to have things in order," she said. "Yes," I replied, "it does." That night, as I placed my key in the small porcelain dish beside my bed, I looked at the reflection in my mirror, the face of a woman who had spent too long being underestimated. For the first time in years, I slept without fear, because now I wasn't the prey anymore. I was the hunter. The calm after that bank visit lasted exactly 12 days. 12 long, quiet days where everything seemed normal, almost too normal. Clara smiled when she passed me in the hallway. Ryan whistled while fixing the back fence. Dinner was calm, polite, even cheerful. But I've lived long enough to know that peace in a house like ours is just the silence before a storm. That Thursday night, I turned on the recording app Patrick had installed on my phone, placed it against the wall, and closed my eyes. The app amplified every sound, and soon their words came through as clear as if they were standing beside me. "Can't go on like this," Ryan muttered. "The house should be ours. She's old, Clara. How much longer?" My breath caught in my throat. And then Clara's voice, smooth, cool, confident, answered, "My cousin works at a nursing home. He says, with a doctor's note, we could declare her unfit, senile." "So what?" Clara snapped. "She's been in our way for years. You think we can start a family living under her roof? You think this house will magically become ours if we keep waiting? There are ways, Ryan. Legal ways. My uncle's a lawyer. A power of attorney. A doctor's report. That's all we need." The air felt heavy, thick with disbelief. My heart beat so hard I could feel it in my throat. But what crushed me most wasn't Clara's words. It was Ryan's silence. He didn't argue. He didn't defend me. And that silence, that awful, cowardly silence, was louder than any betrayal I'd ever known. When the whispers finally faded into sleep, I sat up in bed, my face wet with tears I hadn't felt fall. I wasn't afraid anymore. I was furious. I saved the recording, uploaded it to the cloud, and sent copies to 3 separate email addresses: Patrick's, my daughter Sarah's, and my own. Then I turned off the light and sat there in the dark, planning. If Clara and Ryan wanted to play games, I was done pretending not to know the rules. The next morning, I called Sarah and Emily. "Sweethearts, I need you to come by the house tomorrow at 10. Bring your husbands. It's important." They both asked what was wrong. "I'm fine," I said softly, "but it's time to set some things straight." Then I called Patrick. "It's time," I told him. He didn't sound surprised. "Are you sure?" "Completely. Bring the documents, all of them, and a notary if possible." Finally, I called Carol, my oldest friend. "Carol," I said, "I need you here tomorrow morning, as a witness, and bring your phone, fully charged." She hesitated. "Eleanor, what are you going to do?" I took a deep breath, watching the first light of dawn spill across my curtains. "I'm going to get my life back." That night, I lay out my best blouse, the one with little blue flowers my husband Arthur had given me for our anniversary. I pressed it neatly, set out my pearl earrings. The next morning, the house felt different. Too still, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. I woke before dawn, the air sharp with November chill. I brewed coffee, strong and black, the way Arthur used to like it. The scent filled the kitchen, warm and bitter, like memory itself. By 10 o'clock, the living room was full. Sarah and Emily sat side by side on the couch, their husbands close behind. Patrick stood quietly by the window, a folder in his hands. Carol hovered near the door, her phone discreetly recording, just as I'd asked. And then came Clara, fashionably late, wearing that smug little smile she thought made her look charming. Ryan followed, awkward and pale, pretending not to notice the tension hanging in the air. "Morning, Mom," he said, forcing a grin. "Good morning, everyone," I replied, setting down my coffee. "Please, sit." Clara glanced around, her eyes darting from Patrick to the others. "What's this about?" "Oh, nothing dramatic," I said softly. "Just a small family meeting. You see, I realized I've been neglecting some paperwork, things that should be properly arranged." She brightened instantly. "Paperwork? You mean the house? The will?" I smiled faintly. "Yes, dear, the will." For a moment, she looked up almost triumphant, but I wasn't finished. "I've made some changes," I continued, turning to Patrick. "Would you read the updated document, please?" Patrick cleared his throat, opening the folder. "This is the last will and testament of Mrs. Eleanor Reynolds," he began. "All assets, including the property known as 418 Meadow Lane, are hereby bequeathed in equal parts to her daughters, Sarah Lawson and Emily Carter." Clara's face froze. Patrick went on, steady and calm. "Furthermore, should Mrs. Reynolds' death be deemed suspicious or non-natural, the property and all financial accounts will be placed under immediate state investigation, and the beneficiaries will be temporarily suspended pending inquiry. Sarah's eyes widened. Emily covered her mouth in shock. But Clara went pale as linen. What? What are you saying? I leaned back in my chair, my voice low and even. I'm saying I'm not as helpless as you thought, dear. You see, I recorded your little conversation the other night. Every word. About nursing homes and power of attorney and how you'd like me declared unfit. Ryan's head snapped toward me, his eyes wide. Mom! No, I said firmly, holding up a hand. You stay quiet now, Ryan. I gave you life. I raised you with love. And you stood there and let that woman talk about locking me away. You did nothing. That silence broke my heart more than her words ever could. Clara's lips trembled, but she tried to recover. This is ridiculous. You misunderstood. We were just talking hypothetically. I cut her off gently, but with steel in my tone. Sweetheart, hypothetical conversations don't end with your cousin calling a doctor to sign false reports. Yes, I know about that too. She went utterly still. Patrick stepped forward, setting down a small USB drive on the coffee table. Everything's backed up. 3 copies, in 3 locations, he said quietly. Clara swallowed hard, her voice cracking. So what do you want, Eleanor? To humiliate us? I looked at her. Really looked at her. For the first time, I didn't see the manipulative woman who had made my life miserable. I saw a scared, lost person, clinging to control. I don't want to humiliate you, I said softly. I just want peace. I want this house to feel like home again. But that can't happen while I'm afraid under my own roof. Ryan's voice shook. Mom, please. I turned to him, my eyes filling. You're my son, Ryan. I'll always love you. But love doesn't mean blindness. If you choose her over your mother's dignity, then you'll live with that choice. For a long moment, silence filled the room. Thick, heavy, electric. Then, without a word, Clara stood. She grabbed her purse, her heels clicking sharply against the wooden floor. You'll regret this, she hissed. Old people always do. She stormed out, slamming the door behind her. Ryan stood frozen, torn between guilt and shame. Then he followed her, slowly, quietly, like a man walking into his own shadow. The door closed, and in that instant, it felt as though years of fear lifted off my chest. Sarah came to me, took my hand and whispered, You did the right thing, Mom. I smiled faintly, the tears finally spilling. Maybe, but it still hurts. Outside, I could hear the car start, tires crunching down the driveway, and I whispered to myself, Goodbye, Clara. That night, after everyone left and the house sank into stillness again, I sat by the kitchen window with my cup of tea. The moonlight spilled across the floor like silver threads, weaving through the quiet. For the first time in months, maybe years, I could breathe without feeling like a guest in my own home. But my heart was heavy, because no matter how strong you are, no matter how much you stand your ground, it still aches when love turns into distance. I thought of Ryan, my boy with scraped knees and wide eyes, who used to run to me when thunder frightened him. Where had that child gone? Was he buried somewhere beneath all that pride, all that influence from the woman he thought he loved? I sat there for hours, just listening to the soft hum of the refrigerator. the house finally at peace. And then I knew what I had to do. I took out my old stationery, the cream-colored one Arthur had bought for our 25th anniversary, and began to write. My hand trembled a little, but my words came steady. Clara, you once told me that this house felt too small for two women. You were right, but not because of the space. It was because of the silence we built between us. I don't hate you, Clara. I never did. What I feel for you is sadness, for the life you could have had if kindness had been your first instinct instead of control. You see, life has a strange way of teaching us humility. The more we try to take, the less we truly hold. You locked a pantry once, thinking it would keep me out. But you ended up locking yourself away. From warmth, from family, from the kind of peace that no money can buy. I forgive you, not because you deserve it, but because I refuse to let bitterness be the last thing I taste in this life. One day when your reflection in the mirror shows you a face that looks tired, not from work, but from worry, I hope you'll remember this letter. And maybe, just maybe, you'll understand what it means to love without fear. I folded the letter carefully, slid it into an envelope, and placed it on the kitchen table, right beside the jar of sugar she always claimed was hers. Then I opened the pantry door, the one she once locked, and filled it again. Flour, sugar, pasta, beans. All the simple things that make a house feel like home. When I was done, I stood there a while, breathing in the scent of spices and quiet redemption. It wasn't victory I felt. It was peace. The next morning, I heard Ryan's truck in the driveway. He didn't knock this time. He just stood by the door, holding the letter, his eyes red, his voice small. Mom. I didn't say anything. I just opened my arms. He came to me like that little boy again. Broken, apologetic, lost. And in that moment, every ounce of anger I had melted away. Because forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting what happened. It means choosing to heal anyway. As the sun rose over the garden, painting gold across the windows, I whispered softly, almost to myself, sometimes the hardest locks to open are the ones we put on our hearts.